I'm Michael Knowles filling in. You can find me on Apple Podcasts at The Michael Knowles Show. You can find me on Twitter at Michael J. Knowles. And very often, when I am filling in on this show, you can find Madeleine Kearns, who is a staff writer at National Review, focuses on this crazy gender ideology that seems to have taken over the country, even though as a medical matter it affects like 4 people, but for some reason as a political and cultural matter, it has taken over everybody. There is a story that came out this week. Halle Berry, a wonderful actress, very talented, has won many awards. Halle was being considered for a role of a transgender man, which, for those who are not familiar with the lingo, means a woman who dresses up like a man and identifies as a man. And she is pulled out of that because apparently today an actress is no longer allowed to play another woman who is playing a man because of political correctness or something. I don't know. Joining us now, Maddie Kearns. Maddie, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I don't even know where to begin with this. There are so many levels here. And I know you are a trained singer, a trained performer, so I think you might have a little insight on the showbiz aspect too. Let's start with that. Am I mistaken, or aren't actresses supposed to pretend to be other people? Isn't that the job?
That's generally how it has worked for a very long time. Yeah. And actually, of course, cross-dressing in theatre has been a thing for a very long time as well. The thing that Halle Berry did is she made 2 cardinal mistakes. The first thing she did was that she had the audacity to say that she was going to play a role which she hadn't had the lived experience of that role as a transgender person, which is obviously on its face preposterous. And then the second thing she did was that she misgendered this fictional character. Can you believe that? She misgendered a fictional character by referring to this transgender man as a woman. And she said this was a woman's experience and a woman's story. I think that was actually her attempt to say, actually, I might not have everything in common with this fictional character, but we do have that in common, which makes sense because normally casting decisions are made based on some kind of common thing that you might have in order to bring to that character. So, yeah, so she made 2 big mistakes there, obviously.
Those are very big mistakes, I suppose, in this woke culture, though. It would make sense to me. I mean, just even as a purely casting matter, if you're trying to cast the role of a woman who dresses like a man, you would cast a woman for that because women who dress like men tend to look more like women, at least in their physical structure. I'm also reminded of one of the great acting theorists in America, Stella Adler, trained so many of the great film stars of the 20th century. She had this joke where she said, unless you happen to be Danish royalty, then you're going to need to use your imagination to play Hamlet. You're going to need to pretend. But now, I don't know, it seems like the line is being blurred between what is real and what is pretend. We're being told that pretend things are real and real things are pretend.
There was a similar incident that happened last summer with Scarlett Johansson, where she initially stood up for herself and made the point that, well, I'm an actress. I can play a tree if I want. I can play a badger if I want. She obviously is very confident in her acting abilities. I think I would personally struggle to play a tree. I don't know about you, Michael. I know you're a trained actor yourself.
It's very difficult, but, one can build up the inner life and you have to work on the sap and those sort of things. But that's all beside the point.
Yeah, I just think it's obviously difficult to really do that role justice because it is an inanimate, piece of vegetation. But in any case, she did make the point that this is exactly what you're saying. This is supposed to be using your imagination to get across empathy, to tell a story, really, and it is a fictional story. So yeah, it's a bit ridiculous.
It is, and I don't know where this goes because, for so long we've heard that women are not treated well in Hollywood. Obviously, the whole Me Too movement was about how men dominate Hollywood and women don't have any power or any real sway. Jennifer Lawrence was complaining about this. I mean, everybody was complaining about this. And then it seems to have shifted on a dime back to giving all the power back to biological males. Are we not going to expect some kind of feminist response to this? I mean, where's Halle Berry's solidarity with the sisterhood?
Well, unfortunately, she just caved right away and started speaking as somebody who had been recently re-educated. She said, I now understand my cisgender privilege. You see the eyes sort of glaze over when you start to hear that language. But yeah, it is really strange how there's not so much feminist backlash as you would expect. I also can't help but notice a double standard. In 2015, I think it was, Eddie Redmayne played the Danish girl, and he was not only able to play that role, that is the role of a transgender woman, he was nominated for an Oscar.
Right.
So there does seem to be a bit of a double standard here. Why is it actresses that can't play trans characters, but actors can?
One of the people who's in the culture, I think we spoke about her last time, was J.K. Rowling. And she gets a lot of flack from the woke intersectional left because she's not down with transgender ideology. She's more of an old school feminist. She wants to defend women's place in art and culture and politics. And J.K. Rowling just signed on to this letter. There were a lot of people, I think it was about 150 people signed on to it. It's being called The Letter in Harper's. And it was this letter of mostly liberal people. I mean, some even as far left as Noam Chomsky, saying that we need to stop canceling people. We need to stop removing them from the culture because they contradict whatever the leftist orthodoxy of the day happens to be. And first of all, a couple of people have already pulled out. They've retracted their signatures. I mean, it's getting a lot of attention because it's being viewed as a betrayal of the left. Where does it stand? Do you it seems to me that there are three groups here. There are the conservatives, and there are the woke, crazy leftists, and then there are like five old school liberals in the middle trying to maintain some order and civil discussion. Is that a lost cause? Where do we stand on the kind of consensus that seems to have evaporated?
It is a lost cause insofar as the wokest of the woke are not actually interested in compromise. So even if you say, I'm happy to use the preferred pronouns that you wish, I'm happy to accommodate trans people insofar as is reasonable, which I think most people, including conservatives, are fine to do that. The key part of that sentence being insofar as it is reasonable, i.e. not sports teams. It doesn't matter because unless you're 100% with the agenda, then you will be cancelled. What was funny about that letter though, Michael, was I read through it a couple of times and I was struck with how liberal the language and the terminology was. They had reference to equality, inclusion. There was lots of dunking on the radical right, all these things you would.
There's a lot of dunking on Trump.
There's a lot of dumping on Trump, exactly. And yet this is not good enough. So I think you just can't really compromise with these people. And so obviously in our particular career choices, we've just decided not to care and say what we like. And there's a sort of freedom that comes with that. Although I don't think we're ever going to work for the New York Times. I hate to break it to you.
I hope we're never going to work for the New York Times. I'd be so ashamed if we were. I think you're right, though. I think there is this kind of balkanization happening. And there are some people, I notice it especially on like the center right, or there are people who really want to just get along and compromise and meet in the middle. And it just strikes me, especially on this transgender issue, there's no middle. What's the middle? Either a man can become a woman or a man cannot become a woman. And if a man can't become a woman, that has certain public policy implications, and men cannot be permitted to go into the girls' changing room and go on from there. And if a man can become a woman, then that also has public policy implications, and that man has every right to go into the girls' changing room, and that man has every right to go into some sports team and win the track race, and that man has every right to take women's parts in Hollywood. Where can the compromise be?
Well, this is exactly right. And this is actually why you find that these old school liberals that you're describing are very much in an uncomfortable alignment, uncomfortable from their perspective, with conservatives like you and I, because really, we are actually saying the same things. Now, I think perhaps you and I might be slightly more blunt about what we're saying, but we are saying the same thing, which is, no, I'm sorry, we really do have to draw the line somewhere. And typically, we draw the line at women and especially at children. Yeah. But this is never going to be enough. It's just, you're just going to find yourself being cancelled. So that's the way it is.
Yes, there's no way to appease the mob. It reminds me of that old quote that you feed the crocodile hoping that he'll eat you last, but he will eat you eventually. It seems like everything's heating up into 2020. Maybe call me a crazy, wild conjecturer, but it seems to me that a lot of what we're seeing in this country and the riots and the statue toppling and the intensity of public debate might have something to do with this presidential election that we've got coming up in a few months. I remember in 2016 when this transgender issue came up, President Trump took a different tact than most of his fellow Republicans who were talking about the kind of philosophical basis of this, why from an anthropological perspective it's just not possible that men can be women, all this. Trump kind of dismissed it. They said, do you think, based on these North Carolina bathroom laws, do you think men should be able to use the women's room? And his answer was, I don't know, what were they doing before? What were they doing before this became a big issue? That seems like it's fine. I never heard of a problem. Let it go. Do you think he'll take a similar approach here? He leaned away from that transgender issue in 2016. Do you think it will play a role in the election as the wokesters have gained so much ground? Or is the election going to be more about secure the border, build up the economy, the more traditional issues that we've heard about?
Well, based on his rhetoric so far, he does invoke culture war themes and narratives quite a lot, which obviously does resonate with his base. And I think this is definitely one that's on the forefront of a lot of people's minds, especially as it relates to things like free speech. And obviously he made in his July 4th speech the fact that it's un-American to not tolerate other viewpoints. So I think that very much does resonate with people. The thing that's interesting as well is that the Trump administration has been painted by the left-wing and liberal mainstream media as being very anti-trans, but actually it's exactly what you just said, Michael. They are simply rolling back all of these things that Obama did when normally by covert means, where he didn't actually have permission to do it. So, for example, the Obama administration issued 2016 guidelines about what to do with schools and colleges with regard to bathrooms. And all that the Trump administration, Education Department and Department of Justice did was clarify that he can't do that. That has to go through Congress. That has to go through the normal channels of power. But it has been painted as this aggressively anti-trans administration, which it doesn't really hold to the facts.
Of course, because you have this aggressive attack on history from the left. So you kind of forget everything that happened more than 5 minutes ago. When we hear an issue such as, for instance, transgender people, men who think they're women, serving in the military, nobody supported that until about, 2015, I think it was. And so now, if you reverse that decision from the late Obama administration, you're told that you're a tyrant, a monster. But this was the view that was held by everybody, including Barack Obama, including the most ardent leftists, until just 5 minutes ago. Do you think, looking at this presidential election, you've got a guy, Joe Biden, who's been in politics since 1776, actually. He didn't sign the Declaration of Independence, but he definitely was there at the time. Joe Biden has held much more moderate views on political issues until very recently. Is that going to come back and bite him, or does it not matter? Is it all just about this present moment, history and philosophy be damned?
Well, it depends entirely on the demographic you're talking about, whether it matters or not. Because I think the people who a lot of people who are voting for Biden are voting against Trump. This comes out in voting enthusiasm polls all the time. It's very much they are voting against Trump. So long as Biden does not overnight turn into Trump, then I think that the symbol of evil that is President Trump will just be reason enough to endorse this. With Biden, though, what's really interesting is he has given his support to things like the Equality Act and so on and so forth, whereas he's been quite hesitant to give his support to Black Lives Matter, knowing that that's divisive. I think he's an older guy who doesn't actually realize how insane this particular issue is. I mean, very few people do until they really look into the fine print and say, whoa. You want to do what with women's shelters? You want to do what with children, gender confused children? I think it's ignorance, actually.
It's a fair point. It sounds all nice, the Equality Act. Who could disagree with that? And Joe Biden has been an empty suit his entire career. He licks his finger, he puts it in the wind, and he tries to figure out which way it's blowing. There is kind of an irony, though, that we're canceling Halle Berry. We're not letting her play certain roles. Everything's about the most marginalized and oppressed groups, and the Democrats nominate the oldest, whitest guy in America. I mean, President Trump at least has a bit of that orange sheen, so perhaps he could claim some kind of minority status. But that's the way it goes, and I guess the way that Joe Biden can make sense of that is he can just identify as somebody else. I think a lot of Democrats wish their nominee would identify as somebody else. Maddie, we've got to go. Thank you as always for being here, our de facto co-host here when I fill in on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go read Maddie's stuff over at National Review. Follow her on Twitter. Just read all her stuff. She's so great, Maddie. Thank you as always.
Thanks for having me.
This video is sponsored by BlinkSale, the revolutionary invoicing software for contractors and small businesses. Spend less time billing and more time making bank with BlinkSale. Get a free trial at the link in the video description.